China, a mystery between the hills and the sea. A mystery between it. China today is remembered more for its emperors and empresses than more things else. But modern China is when modern China is when it really unfurled. The history of modern China is a very, very great history. Its beginning, a portal history, and everyone knows how it rebelled under a very good idea. And it does have republics today. A land with foreigners. From the beginning of history, China has become a great land and a great nation. Republics under a greatness and great doings of history. This is the modern history of China. Welcome back. Here's the Chinese history at the beginning of actually 1911, and fortunately, to the middle of 2005. This video will be probably how China rebelled under a great source of influence that publics under greatness. Now we will experience many things, very, very much of things. China had rebellion since the beginning of the 20th century, and yes, but there was rebellion for the beginning of the emperors and empresses. But the whole thing of China already taken. Their success between rebellions was how they overthrew the emperor. When the overthrow of the emperor came, they really had a greatness on their land because China really, and they did. The Cultural Revolution had begun in late 1911. When 1912, the election of 1912, very good United States. It's not been much known in China today. It's more known in the United States. But when China coordinated, it had a revolution beginning between the nationalists and the communists. Between the nationalists and communists was about to get dirty. The communists had the army support on them sometimes and some not times. But to the wishes of China, it had become a very, very full nation and a very great nation of publics. Great greatness, billions of sources. China had become a nation that coarsely had a very, very impact on the real stage. And how? Well, today we know it. It is how they really did things, and how they did it is way not on our list because the course of China is not known with quarterly. China had rebelled, and right after it was over, how cultural, they still didn't find how cultural. They were still battling each other throughout. They were still battling throughout pace when China became legendary. China had become a very, very cool nation to its republic, to its destination. To the things we love today, the things we don't love, China was the things we love. China really coordinated into the modern century. And it was biting and biting. But by 1939, things got a little bluggy, and the Cultural Revolution looked like it wasn't ending. China still battled which out. China also had a very good system of coordinates. A very good system of federalism. China is always a nation that publics under a great personality of things. When China became more legendary, history was one of the great things about China. China still battled up between its two revolutions and had a great time. China holded lots of business and things, and how they did it was how it did legendary things. Well, the emperor was the last emperor of China, I suppose. He was what we're done with. He was invented by 1940, but they also did things in World War II. World War II break out striking for China. At the beginning of Chinese history, in modern history, it already seemed to come in for China. modern history. But no, it survived World War II and survived the Cold War. It survived two nations. It was one of the last nations that communists survived it. Survived it, and it was legendary. That was a legendary for China. The Chinese legendariness did not always continue. It took a lot of rebellions off the way, and it had a very distance. China was a very honorable, very great nation. But it hadn't always a court, of the courtness, because China is just brilliant. Throughout the communists and the nationalists, things were bound together. By late 1940s, communists had control of the land. Really, the Chinese Communist Revolution is a public nation. It really had a very great soul between the real stage and how it worked. Like everything worked. It was Chinese and had a very lot of still friends. China had become worldly legendary for fault, but all those other things we love today, things that we don't love, is always motivated with China. China had become a nation state. It also became a nation state in time it was legendary. The time it was legendary. By the time it was legendary, it became really legendary. But we had a lot of days with China that wasn't legendary at all. And the Chinese Communist Revolution, more things painted. The rules was Mao Zedong, and it had a very, very, very famous. Mao Zedong is a very famous. His book is spread all around China. Mao Zedong, what he did was to incorporate culture of the revolution. The Chinese Revolution became, and the communist China was communist indeed. But at the beginning, China had become a very nation. But China had a very great and greatness to its modern history. In the modern history of China, China already waved their communist flag, so the moreness on the way to the real stage, on the way to the index stage. China had battled it for many years. By the time the Communist Revolution ended, China was communist, and it became identical with Mao. Mao Zedong was. Mao Zedong or Mao Zedong? Who is he? That guy was a man that coined the Cold War. Also, there was failures behind his administration. The failures that promoted in Mao's administration was legendary. The administration was especially cruel in how it rebelled and how it courted it. And China already became incensed with measures to be needed throughout China's history. China had a very bold executions were going on. The failures that Mao did was how he still coordinated docking the Soviet system idea. About it, it really was a very voted district to survive the Cold War. How to survive the Cold War is a question to historians as not important for history. But they thought how to survive the Cold War was the protection to sacrifice his life. One nation to be left of the communist side. Communism, really, is a very, very, very important thing. China had replaced communism since the day it was born. And knew Google, right there. It's a very, very thing that China had idea. How rebellion it is, many things people don't know today, but people know everywhere. And China important a lot. But China had advanced. It was a mystery between the hills and the sea. It was incredibly advantaged. Surviving the Cold War was another challenge on the brace. One of the things in the Cold War was how Mao's invited next. Really, how they invited them. They discussed it, and China was really watching how communism was ran, especially how the failure of communism in China reduced in core activities, because China had become a real power but it didn't realize this real power has to become a great world power. And how does it do it? It uses force. And how can it use force? It has to use maintenance. And when it was over, China was becoming more militarized in the Cold War. By the time Mao Zedong now died, China was shocked. They put him to him in their office. The Soviet Union was the only one to do it. Well, who knows how to make things. It was a very, very tough job at that time. The Soviet Union was barely losing out sometimes because what it did was help China rebellion from opponent things in the 1980s. By the 1980s, more things were becoming invented. In the late 1980s, the Chinese leaders of the Communist Party. The Communist Party rebelled under a very serious choice. China had ceasing to exist under force, because how it began is not how it becomes. But when China did all these stuff, China was a failure, but China really survived the failure. That is not usually happening in Chinese history, because it always just goes down and says we're going to fall, and it turns out to not fall. China had also made many failures by the 1990s, including the Pains of Holdings. In the photo system, when the Cold War was over, they were losing out, but they were still alive. It's a surviving idea. But they also had to question how their system was. They opened up the Great Wall. They had pretty tourists, but that wasn't enough until 2015. It was fainted. By the late 1990s, more things failed. 4 years later, after 1997, in 2002, the militarization of China was becoming more admired. People were wondering what to do with China and what to think it. China was a very, very, very important nation at the time. They were internally Dennett. They had a very, very seized nation. China had very false ideas, and they didn't have a very great court. May the land a true land is not being claimed by the 21st century, but this was really ideas, and how they did it is what historians ask. China had become ruled stage between legs and legs and legs and legs, but the twig of the open area didn't also inquire China. China's Communist Party was what they do capitalism. Capitalism and communism was combining by the early 21st century, and how to stop it? Not at all. It was just constantly making it up and up and just up and up and up and up and up. Oh, why? It was coming up because China had become a legendary land. And how China did it is what historians remember as faith lives. Many people loved how China listened by its leader, with President Barack Obama and President George W. Bush. They met seeking how it would pilot leads. Like how to deal with America, too. China was really good at dealing with America. It had become a crisis. The crises amounted, they just survived. And what they did was accomplishment on one crisis. That was just the great thing of it. And how they did that is how they republiced in the course of the century. Because how it became is how it became by 2000. It's by 2012. From 2012 to 2013, the nation had very big things. By 2014, there was much things with President Obama. China also dealt with crises, rebellion under the Philistines. China was a very managed nation. Throughout 2015, it perfected events. In 2015, the more thing was gone, and people were loving how terrorists were not there. Tourists were there. They had no one suspicion China being a horrible thing. It was a great place, and no one knows that China at all becoming great. And how it did become great is how historians think. By May 26th, the China had become in crises, and they solved them. And by it proved the end of Painsul important things. The history of modern China is a very, very important thing. The history of modern China, immortally from greatness, is remembered for a greatness. From the horse of history, modern China spread around it. Modern China is really a land that rebels under a lot of stuff. So you need to know something about modern China. It's a land that modern China, great land of inventions, will throughout the years become legendary, and it will become a great land. True history and true courses of history.